Nowhere in Rhode Island is the fight against corporate cronyism taken more seriously here than on Coalition Radio or in the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island. This show in its infancy, in addition to a variety of groups and causes getting together just 2 years ago to fight and ultimately crush what we often refer to here as the Wet Fenway dream of the Billionaire Baseball Boys Club, in the aggregate, the 10th wealthiest sports ownership group on the planet, here in Little Pawtucket, or if you're not from Rhode Island, Pawtucket, Rhode Island. It's just starting to heat up. We're going into Labor Day weekend. The hearings by our Senate, our esteemed, the Sawns, if you will, of Rhode Island government have been announced. They're going to be taking place throughout September. It's time for us to turn up the heat. No national publication does a better job of addressing corporate cronyism in all its turgid ramifications than, of course, Reason.com. Folks, Reason.com should be required reading on a daily basis because they take some of the more important, sometimes the most esoteric constitutional issues and issues involving the culture. They make them accessible, they make them tangible, they make them real, and at the same time, they deliver an important constitutional message. They do freedom like no one else does freedom on a daily basis. Joining me for the first time, we've been blessed to have a number of contributors from Reason Magazine, not the least of which, of course, was Matt Welch, who was the keynote speaker at the Rhode Island Libertarian Party annual convention this year. But joining me for the first time is raconteur, comedian, and also producer and host at Reason TV, Andrew Heaton. Andrew, welcome to the Coalition.
Hello, thank you for having me on. I like that you're calling me a raconteur. I think that means I'm good at conversation, right?
Absolutely.
And put that on my card.
Absolutely. And folks, we linked to it earlier this week. We will link to it again. Wrote a great piece this week in Reason, essentially pointing out the fraud of supporting sports. First of all, give us a little idea of what you do at Reason. You occupy a variety of roles. A little bit about Reason TV, and then tell us about how you feel about sports.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I do a lot of political satire at Reason. Reason being America's flagship libertarian publication. It's a magazine and a website, and has a YouTube channel with a variety of videos. I am involved in the funny videos for Reason, so I'm doing political satire for them on a regular basis. We did a video, Libertarian Game of Thrones, which is actually
wait. That was awesome. Now, wait, you ultimately lost your head over that, didn't you?
Yes, I literally get decapitated in it.
Okay.
And it bothered me a little bit how much people enjoyed that. Apparently me dying is greatly amusing to people across the political spectrum. Yeah, I do that, and I host Mostly Weekly, which we'll get into in a moment, a la the sports show that I did. And Mostly Weekly is sort of a poor man's John Oliver, but it's from a libertarian perspective. And that's hosted on Reason, and so very much worth checking out. As far as sports go, I wish everybody the best of happiness in terms of whatever makes them happy in pursuing it. I would ask that they not involve my tax dollars in that pursuit. And I think that sports oftentimes, because it's so popular, is able to really hijack discourse over what's an actual good use of taxpayer money. And I would posit to you that stadiums are one of the worst investments you can make in terms of taxpayer money. It never pays the money back. You're just handing over millions of dollars to a billionaire who doesn't need the income. And a lot of the time it has deleterious effects on the local economy anyway. So I hope people in Rhode Island will do as I know they're capable of and be fiscally intelligent people and pay out of pocket what they want for in sports without involving the actual ledgers of government.
By the way, I believe the moment at the end of the video was, I thought this was the libertarian moment. That still stays with me. Let's talk about the Olympics for a second, because America was, and we're using the Coalition Radio air quotes here, blessed to find that they again will be the host for another Olympic Games.
Yeah.
How does that usually work for the host city?
Well, it usually turns out terribly because there's this I guess emotionally understandable sentiment that because you're bringing in a lot of people that it's going to make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, anybody that hosts the Olympics bankrupts whatever economy they're a part of. It was terrible in Rio. I mean, there's this giant stadium complex that they built that's not being used for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in a place where there's some genuine deficits in terms of things people need that they could have been putting that money towards. And instead they did it where they got these sort of ego boost of hosting worldwide games, but shouldn't have been the ones to do that. When you go back a little bit further to Greece, Greece is not in a good solvent fiscal position.
Right.
And they decided to host the Olympics, I think maybe it was 2004 maybe, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the 90s. There's just a big stadium that's being unused, and they're still paying for it. You go even further back. The mayor of Montreal said at one point that you could no more lose money on the Olympics than a man could get pregnant, and pretty much bankrupted Montreal subsequently. So Los Angeles, that's about to host these games, I think they're really biting off more than they can chew in terms of budget. And to make matters worse, they're going to be using eminent domain to build some of these structures that are needed. So in other words, the government's going to come in and say, hey, your house is in a great location to build a stadium, so we're going to give you what we think it's worth, regardless of whether or not you want to be involved in this process, boot you out, bulldoze your house, and then build a stadium that we'll use once, and it'll bankrupt everybody. So I think Los Angeles is about to have a real tough time. And I think you're also seeing that in the Olympics because they know it, to where they're beginning to give out the next city well in advance because they want to lock them in, because it is such a bad fiscal position to be in. They're realizing that the actual cities vying for it are declining in number.
Right. Right, and it was interesting because it was Boston locally here and the No Boston Olympics crowd, who were once derided by the now current mayor of Boston as nothing more than 12 people in a Twitter account, I believe I'm paraphrasing, because you mentioned, and this is very important, you mentioned the buzz, if you will.
I mentioned the what?
You mentioned this sort of buzz, the ego effect, the gratifying effect of having your town. That's the emotional chord that's always played on, isn't it, when it comes to sports subsidies? It's you know, your hometown pride is appealed to. Is that sort of the universal that you see everywhere?
I do. I think that trumps it trumps decision making at every level, and it's so infatuating to have a major league stadium or a major league team or the Olympics. It seems like such an ego boost that really crowds out an abundance of evidence that it's not a good idea.
Right.
And I mean, you conceivably could do these things, but I think if you were going to do it, you'd actually have, in the case of the Olympics, you'd have the Olympics pay for it, or you'd have private entities do it rather than having the city itself pay for something it can't afford. And ultimately cut back on education or services or just go bankrupt. Mm-hmm. And then when you come to stadium subsidies, I mean, that's absolutely something the private sector could do on its own. It's just that there's a lot of owners that realize they can prey on the emotions of these cities and threaten to leave unless they're given handouts. Right. To the people that leave them east of the country, and they will they'll wind up getting it. And yeah, I think a lot of that is just sort of a bravado that is baseless in terms of actual investment. And again, if you enjoy sports, I think that's awesome. I don't really like sports. I think I'm deficient in genes. I wish I did like sports. But I would also pay for them out of my own pocket rather than compelling all of my fellow citizens to pay for something that's not a good fiscal investment. I would not, to my credit, require the good people of Rhode Island to foot the bill for a Star Trek museum that might not earn any money and would only benefit me and my friends. I don't think that that's economically sensible or morally defensible to take that money for what is in effect just an ego boost that's not going to be a good use of taxpayer funds. And I think sports has this weird ability to kind of short-circuit logic that would otherwise be present for a number of other things. Like if a city were debating, I don't know, whether or not to increase recycling or something like that, I would think somebody would show up with a ledger sheet and be able to kind of talk about the pros and cons. I would hope. But with sports, people are so enthusiastic to do it it trumps logic.
Right, and we argue here now. The city of Pawtucket, if I were to use for example, and I know you live in the greater New York metropolitan area. If I were to use an example, it would be very much like, say, a New Rochelle or a Uniondale or a fine burg, if you will. Clearly, however, the monorail argument, as we call it here, simply doesn't play because ultimately, after talking, in my case, to literally hundreds and hundreds of homeowners, citizens, students, newly arrived, what they take pride in is a school that's well built that they can take their children to and feel safe and feel great about their academic prospects. What they feel pride in is walking down a city street and not seeing any board ups. What they take pride in is walking down past a commercial strip mall, and it's largely occupied by locally owned great businesses that are thriving. That's what they take pride in. So often this pride play is based on the desire of the politically elite, the politically connected, to rub shoulders with the glitterati, if you will, so that they can feel more powerful, and they're quite willing to use the public funds to do it. And when Boston attempted to get the Olympics, that was exactly the case. This is everywhere, though. I mean, reason you guys cast a pretty long shadow across the country. This is literally everywhere. You're seeing this in all parts of the country. Now, I know down in D.C. they've recently defeated. It's being challenged now. Do you think people are smarter as the internet, popped the balloon in the public subsidy bubble? What do you think the prospects are going forward for this kind of madness?
Well, I have two thoughts. I mean, on the one hand, I think that the abundance of evidence on stadium subsidies is so immense that it's surprising that this is a conversation we're still having as people.
Right.
I mean, right and left economists pretty much across the board agree on the concept of supply and demand, and that stadium subsidies don't pay out. Right. There's not a lot of people in either camp that think that it would work well, So on the one hand, it might just be part of the human condition that we so much want to have a team that we support and fight another team that we're willing to toss money at, that it's just going to be a perennial issue. I think at least, though, that this is an issue that we've been drumming at Reason, I know, for a while before I got there. There's been some great articles that have been published in Reason, and even in the Atlantic and a few other places. There's been several different publications that have shed a light on this. So I hope that there will come a point where a critical mass of information will happen to where people are aware that it's a bad sell. And I again should point out, it doesn't mean you can't have stadiums, and it doesn't mean that you can't have sports teams. What it means is that you're going to have the private sector handle them. And if there's anything the private sector is well designed to handle, it would be sports.
Right.
It's not it's not a vital public. Bodily fluids are not going to shoot out of people if you have the private sector handle we get an argument about like ambulances and fire stations and that kind of thing about public-private partnerships. For stadiums, you can totally have these things, but I think people. You pointed a moment ago to this sort of ominous relationship between politicians and I think you said the glitterati, right? Or whatever the kind of the people in the spotlight is. I think it's very much a phenomenon that's happening. I personally think, and this is just my opinion, I think that we as human beings are extremely tribalistic, and sports funnels into that very well. My background's comedy, and I do comedy in New York. And I was surprised when I first started out. I anticipated death and sex being foremost in people's minds when I told jokes. And that you can talk to comedians, and they'll usually have very similar sentiments where if you've got something involving sex or death, the audience is going to react to it because everybody has very strong, very visceral instincts about that. What surprised me, but has been consistent, is if you bring up some kind of tribal membership and you start questioning why someone's in it, people flip out. So were I to go into a city and come to Pawtucket and you guys get your minor league team, were I to begin saying so the people on this team are all from Pawtucket? Well, no, they're from Kansas and Puerto Rico. They just moved here. So really, why are you rooting for them? Does the owner live here? Well, no, he lives in New York. So you're rooting for jerseys, which
Right.
is a Seinfeld line.
Right.
People get mad. People get really mad when you start to do that. So I think that human beings have this very intrinsic desire to form a team to fight another team, and that the stadium subsidies are able to tap into that for nefarious purposes. Because again, it's something that healthy sports. I think Europe would go to World War III if you pulled the plug on soccer. I'm very glad they have sports over there. But you don't need to have the public sector involved in it. And it ends up just shifting the burden from the people that are actually benefiting from it, the owners, and the people psychologically benefiting from it, the consumers, instead shifting it to the taxpayers, many of whom, like myself, don't want anything to do with it. And at the same time, shifting those funds away from things that I care about, like, the police and fire departments, that kind of thing, and instead putting it in this sort of Roman, bread and circuses category that I don't think the government needs to be involved in.
Right. I mean, you point out the irony, if you will, of supporting this tribal culture, which in fact is nothing if not international, particularly in the four major sports, if you will. The true irony is that on a level of, we'll call it fundamental economics, that you're actually using local funds in a local economy and you're dispersing them at will to across the country. I mean, there's not only is it not good business because it's promoting subsidized competition against local businesses for a ever declining consumer entertainment dollar, but at the same time you're literally taking your money and sending it out to the rest of the country. It's not going to be respent in the economy. The multiplier effect will be largely diminished. And so I keep searching for a shred, a single reason at any level why you would want to do this. I mean,
again, it's just I think shouting sports in all caps is really the only rejoinder to it. And I mean, there's a corollary to it. If you're like me and you're less sports enthusiastic and you're more pretentious and artsy, the flip side of that is film subsidies, which are pretty much in the same camp, where every state really wants to be involved in the film industry because it's glamorous and they want to get some of that sweet Hollywood glitter into their state. And that, again, if you want to come film there, that's terrific. And I would enjoy seeing, my home state of Oklahoma getting films in it. That would fill my heart with joy. But the actual economics of it are that when you do that, you're shifting the tax burden from people coming into the state to people that live in the state, because somebody still has to pay for the stuff. And the people coming into the state are there for a couple of months, and then they're moving back to Hollywood, or they're moving back to Austin or Louisiana or wherever they were. And the actual magnifying effect and the spillover effect is pretty minimal and doesn't justify the expenditure of funds or subsidies. And you have the same thing. It's I want to get this glittery thing, and I'm going to use other people's money to do it, and it doesn't make good fiscal sense. And I would argue it is immoral, because you're not doing something that's truly for the public good, which is there's a role for government to do. You're doing it for ego, and you're doing it for a limited amount of people's ego, and not benefiting everybody else in the equation.
It really does need to be a Shelbyville idea, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Look at a city like New York, and it's interesting because this isn't just limited to the burbs, to the great unwashed out here in flyover country. And Rhode Island is, astonishingly enough, after 70 years of socialism, has managed to make itself in the heart of the Northeast Corridor a unique form of flyover country. But New York, New Jersey, this is playing out everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, not being a huge sports buff, I don't know all of the history of New Jersey and New York, but I think New York is it's done the same thing, and not just subsidies, but also using eminent domain. Barclays Center was something like that, where there was a housing development there, people lived there, and they decided that would be a good place to build a stadium, so they shoved a lot of people out of their homes and then built it, and then required subsidies, which is also kind of a perverse logic, because you're saying that something is going to be a moneymaker, but that it needs the funding from the public. Generally, when you're using public funds, it's because the thing's not a moneymaker and it needs some other source of revenue.
Right.
You see that in New York, you see that in New Jersey. I think you see it played out everywhere, because again, it's that kind of focused on ego. It's always irritating. And again, it's always baffling to me because I look at that and I'm like, this is just, I can't think of a single economist who thinks that sports subsidies or stadium subsidies are a good idea. And you see that play out across the board.
Right. Well, it's interesting though. If you follow the pathology of these events, it very often plays out like the acceptances of tragedy, or problem resolution. The first stage, of course, in promoting it is that it's going to be wonderful for the psyche of a particular area, and it will have this halo-like effect in terms of civic pride. The second step then is to point out just how much money it will make for the city. Or the respective area, and how much, and the key word here in Rhode Island is ancillary development, which I find intriguing because...
Ooh, I've never heard that. What does that mean?
Here's the irony of that. I know what it's supposed to mean, but if you were to ask most of the folks at what we call Halitosis Hall, our state house, all credit to Rudy Cheeks, as we say here, I don't think they really know what it means. But it sounds great, and it sounds really like business school, like B school people say words like that. So
when you said ancillary development, I was about to write you a check. I know what he's talking about. I'm going to give him some money and he'll make some more.
It's kind of like the political equivalent of dialing a 900 number. But the next step beyond it is even more intriguing because as the economic prospects fade into memory, or recede, if you will, into the dusk of our civic future, lo and behold, it was really never supposed to make money. It was supposed to create an environment where other businesses could make money in its presence. That's what it was really supposed to be, because there's really, we as Americans, whether it be local issues like this or national issues, we are what I call short attention span theater. We have this collective amnesia, and we forget, oh yeah, that's right. It was supposed to do something. Here's the great irony. In the case of Pawtucket, there's a stadium that's been there for 60 years, and there is not a single shred of economic development around it. That's not a shot at the people of Pawtucket. They've managed to transform in a number of ways in terms of their economy that are purely organic and purely based on capitalism, as opposed to this false injection, this Hail Mary pass, this break glass, add water notion that this stadium is going to provide. There's no evidence in its current form that it's ever done anything. So yet we have this hope against all hopes that somehow it's going to create something for somebody. And Pawtucket, unfortunately, will join the likes of Niagara Falls and Scranton and all these different cities that have fallen. Hartford, check this one out. I think they're called the Goat Yards or Yard Goats. That's it. They actually called a baseball team the Yard Goats. No kidding. Check it out.
Minor league baseball teams tend to be better named, in my opinion, because minor league baseball teams have some cool, weird names.
Right.
Because they're oftentimes the Corn Huskers or I don't know, the Goat Stampers or the Manatee Harpooners or whatever.
Well,
they tend to be more interesting. I'll give them that.
Right. Well, there are the Iron Pigs of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Go figure. We've only got a minute. We've only got a minute. I'm sorry. We've only got a minute or two left.
I'll say the one argument that I would like to hear that I think would be an intellectually honest argument would be this is going to cost everybody money, but there's a psychic benefit to it that outweighs the economic costs. I would probably say no, it doesn't, but that would at least be intellectually honest. If people said, look, we're subsidizing taxpayers, but you're going to get a pride boost, and that's what you're getting, is you get pride in your community because you have this thing. You're not going to make money off of it. We're going to have to take money away from the fire trucks and from the police, but it's going to be worth it. I think then at least you'd have a frank discussion about the pros and the cons of it instead of effectively lying about what are false economic promises.
Right. Again, now we're both in your comedic life and in your Reason.com life. Where can folks find Andrew Heaton?
Check me out on my website, mightyheaton.com. That's M-I-G-H-T-Y, Heaton, Heaton.com. If you go there, you'll see a ton of videos that I've done, political articles that I've written, books that I've written. You can stalk me on so many different levels if you go there. If you want to see some really good political analysis from some really smart people that are far more clever than me, go to Reason.com. And once you're there, if you want to take a break and read something funny, then search my name, which is Andrew Heaton, and you'll get your fix.
Excellent. Folks, Andrew Heaton, great article this week, Reason.com. We will again provide the link to it this weekend. You know, discussing in both serious and not so serious terms this underlying obsession we have with funding sports. Of course, if you're a libertarian, you've seen. I'm not even a Game of Thrones fan, and I was crying. It was just so funny. It was just great stuff. If you haven't seen Mr. Heaton, I'll just say at the end of the video, gives his all for the libertarian moment. I hope you'll join us again. This was a blast.
Sure, I'd love to.
And should your comedic enterprises take you up to here to Little Rhodey, where, as we discussed earlier today, is truly a target-rich environment, no degrees of separation, and perhaps the gene puddle of Rhode Island and of New England, I hope you'll come in studio and spend some time with us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll come by. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you so much. Folks, Andrew Heaton of Reason Magazine. Of course, Reason.com should be required reading, regardless of your political stripe, regardless of your perspective on the world. It's smart, it's funny, it's engaging, it's accessible. Just make it part of your day. Folks, you are, in fact, right now, at this very moment in time, listening to the Coalition on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network, broadcasting live here at the Go Local Live Media Center, 90 Boston Street, in the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. We've told a couple or more stories today. There's more to come. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Our apolitical, all POS Sox, all crony capitalists, all wet Fenway Dream, all billionaire baseball boys club Twitter feed at Pawtucket is home. Folks, stay tuned. Yes, we